We will be talking about language today. The definition of languages are spoken, written, or signed words, and the way we combine them to think and communicate. This is what sets us apart from other animals, right? So we're the most sophisticated animal on the planet. And other animals have languages, and we've identified, sounds and kind of words that they can say, but nowhere as much as, the human language with thousands and thousands of words that we have. And remember, a lot of times we think about language as only spoken, but it's also written and sign, right? So in fact, sign language actually uses the same parts of the brain that any other language does. So language development, and you know, there'll be a handout for the language, more depth of the language development, but just an overall, you need to know receptive language, which is the ability to understand speech, and productive language, which is the ability to speak. And we'll talk about what brain areas deal with each. So receptive language, the ability to understand speech. Around 4 months, the baby can actually start to discriminate speech sounds. They start to read lips, and they develop receptive language. So, before that, everything's kind of like a babble. They're starting to realize that there's actually these different sounds happening. At 7 months, segment spoken sounds into individual words. So by 7 months, they realize that these are actually different words that have been spoken, like mom, dad, milk, things like that. So productive language, the ability to speak, around 4 months, babies, they're at the babbling stage, right? So they utter sounds. This is the same language regardless of culture. So all babies throughout the world pretty much babble the same. Even deaf children babble. They tend to do it more with their hands, but they still babble, right? So that's pretty much universal around the world. By 10 months, though, they become functionally deaf to other languages. Now, that doesn't mean they can't learn other languages, but it's not natural to them anymore. So they need to be exposed to language within the first 10 months to be to learn it naturally. All right, so otherwise they become functionally deaf to other languages. So the rule is by about 1 year, children are saying one word, right? Mom, dad, milk, all, usually simple words. By 2 years, they're putting words together, right? Usually it's one or two words that they put together as they can talk. And then by 3, they're starting to put together full sentences, simpler sentences, but they're starting to talk. So how do we learn? There's two main theories on this, uh, Skinner and Chomsky. So one would be a nature, you know, theory, one would be a nurture theory. So think about that as we're talking about these two. So Skinner believed that we learn language that develops through learning principles like association, imitation, and reinforcement. All right, so the baby or the child associates, as the parent are talking and they're talking about the TV and they're looking at the TV, all of a sudden they associate, oh, that must be the TV. Or imitation, right? They imitate what the parents say. So whatever the parents say or who's ever around them, they're going to say those same words. That's why when you see all these young kids, using profanity and things like that, they're just imitating what they've seen around them. So it's not necessarily their fault. It's the fault of whoever is around them. Or if they left them in front of the TV, using inappropriate language or music or anything like that. And the last thing would be reinforcement that Skinner believed in. So if the baby said, mom or dad, they're reinforced, right? Positively reinforced. And that could just be by a smile or good job or, something like that. And the baby sees that and now they're going to keep, speaking those words, right? Because they were reinforced. Chomsky believed in a language acquisition device, right? So he thought you were pre-wired with a sort of box that needs to be turned on and off for us to understand and produce language. So pretty much, he thought it was naturally inside of you, and when you reach a certain age, it just kind of like switches on, and you can start to learn language. All right, so now think about nature and nurture. Which one do you think is nature? Which one do you think is nurture? If you said Chomsky was nature, you were correct, right? Because that means you're born, nature is like you're born that way. Skinner would be nurture because you're learning from your environment. The critical period. All right. So the critical period, we've talked about a couple of critical periods. When we talk about language, the critical period is that you must be exposed to either a spoken or a sign language by the age of 7, or you can't learn any language. After 7, even learning other languages is harder. That's why you want to, learn a language like a second or third language as early as possible, because then it comes naturally to you. Right? The later you learn a language, the harder it is. And we'll talk about Jeannie, that was that feral child. She, she wasn't really exposed to a language, and when they tried to teach her, and same thing with other failed children, is they can start to learn a language a little bit, but then they reach that plateau, and they can never get beyond that plateau. So it looked like she was starting to be able to learn language, and she was learning simple words, but not like a real language, like semantics and grammar and putting things together. The last slide, brain and language, and so this is kind of review from last unit. So Broca's area, if you remember, is the ability to speak. So remember we were talking about receptive language and stuff like that. So receptive language would be Wernicke's area. Broca's area would be the ability to speak. That's reductive language. And so what happens if you have damage to that, right? If you have damage to the Broca's area, you can't speak words anymore. But yet you can sing familiar songs and understand speech because that's a different part of the brain. So if you have it's common with like strokes, and if you have a stroke to the Broca's area, you can't talk anymore. You can like write out what you're going to say, and you can sing familiar songs because that's a different part of the brain. Wernicke's area, that's language comprehension and expression. So if you have damage to this area, you can speak, but only meaningless sentences. And aphasia is a vocab word to know, so it's kind of new. And that's just impairment of language caused by damage to the Broca's area or Wernicke's area. It could be some type of brain damage, an accident. A lot of times it's actually caused, as I've mentioned before, by a stroke. So just aphasia is impairment of language.